So, today I want to talk about the negotiations over water in the Colorado River. The way that water has been historically allocated from the Colorado River has been nothing short of messed up. In absolute brief, the pacts that have been developed between these seven states in the region ended up prioritizing the lower basin states, and between them, California has always gotten priority rights, simply because it was the first state to colonize the region. Meanwhile, the agreements have been over allocating the water supplies and often ignoring indigenous peoples' actual first rights and access to these water supplies. That said, the fighting between these states has never really ceased over the years. But things have become rather critical over just the past few years, as aridification caused by overuse and climate change has slowly led to the river drying up, which in turn has caused Lake Mead and Lake Powell to get to dangerous levels of water where they've reached almost dead pool levels, which would immediately shut down hydroelectric power as the levels of the Colorado River seem to get lower and lower. So this year, the federal government stepped in, and they tried to demand that the states do something. On June 14th, the Bureau of Reclamation Commissioner announced that cuts of 2 million to 4 million acre feet would be needed in 2023 to address declining reservoir levels. So we have here that by mid August, they were already supposed to have worked all of the details out. They were given 60 days by the federal government, and naturally, that didn't happen. After weeks of negotiations, which some participants say have at times grown tense and acrimonious, the parties have yet to reach an agreement as of that time. Now, Interior Department officials had warned that they are prepared to impose cuts if necessary to protect reservoir levels. Managers of water agencies say that they've been discussing proposals and will continue to negotiate in hopes of securing enough reductions to meet the Biden administration's demands. And again, that would mean eliminating use of about 15 to 30% of the water supply. Now, the latest round of closed door talks as of mid August had occurred in Denver, and participants said that they wouldn't publicly discuss the offers of water reductions made, but acknowledged that these offers have amounted to far less than 2 million acre feet. For comparison, the total annual water use of just the city of Los Angeles alone is nearly 500,000 acre feet. Now, there's also been, as I've mentioned, growing tensions between the states of the river's lower basin, California, Arizona, and Nevada, and those of the upper basin, Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico, and Utah. That's because of the way that the agreements had previously been made. The upper basin was always required to make cuts first. And most recently, Arizona and Nevada have had to make cuts again before California. And again, that's all tied to arrangements that were made in the 1920s. And so when we look at all of this today and how this was supposed to be resolved by mid August, we find that the federal government has actually done little on its promise thus far to actually implement these policies for 2023. However, we've seen a surprising shift in the way that one of the states has been handling this, namely California. California actually stepped up and attempted to lower its water levels with a voluntary promise. And this is both huge and kind of a big issue. So we'll talk about that. So we have here that California is entitled currently to 4.4 million acre feet of the Colorado River water per year, more than any other state. The water flows through canals to farmlands in Imperial and Riverside counties and to cities from Los Angeles to San Diego. 4 water districts and the state's Colorado River Board said in a letter to the federal government on Wednesday that they're proposing to reduce water use by up to 400,000 acre feet per year. That would amount to about 9% of the state's total water allotment from the river for the next 4 years through 2026. Now, while this is a good first step, as we'll talk about, that's nowhere near that 2 million level that they need to reach as an absolute minimum. Now, California, as I've mentioned before, has been under a lot of pressure to shoulder most of the water cutbacks because they've been the one that has had to cut water back the least over the years. But in response to all of this, we've seen that some of the people from the Upper Colorado River Commission have said, all in all, it appears to be an encouraging first step. This interstate agency that manages the water in the upper basin of Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, and New Mexico. Now, in July, as I mentioned, the upper basin states submitted a plan to conserve water that included restarting a water conservation project known as the System Conservation Pilot Program, which actually paid farmers to leave fields fallow. So they've been literally paying people to make sure that they could have enough of a livelihood, but not use the water levels. It's actually been cheaper and more effective to pay people a stipend, as it were, than to have them grow food. Now, this feels like a major symptom of modern capitalism, and I'm not going to go into all of that because that would be a whole video unto itself. But the original Upper Basin wide effort ran from 2015 to 2018, spent about $8 million, and reduced consumptive use by roughly 50,000 acre feet. Again, an underwhelming amount. But the Upper Basin is a lot more limited in what it can do based on the way that a lot of the arrangements that we mentioned happened. Again, they're not able to cut quite as much because their levels have always been determined by how much water needs to get to California and Arizona. Now, until now, the lower basin states of California, Arizona, and Nevada had not either collectively or individually directly proposed to the federal government a plan for Colorado River cuts. Now, this, of course, changed very recently, with California stepping forward. And so while this is a good first step, it's a good first step that really needed to happen a long time ago, at the very least months ago, but more than likely years ago. The unfortunate reality is not nearly enough has been done, and while this may begin the talks, we have no idea if the goal of 2 to 4 million water acres will actually be reached, especially as the upper basin states can't really do much, and the lower basin states don't seem to be willing to cut those levels. Further, we're still entirely unsure how California would even begin to implement this on a local level, especially when cities and the agricultural sector are in constant battle over water supplies internally to California as well. The truth is also that this will be a voluntary cut, which means that there's little knowledge on whether or not it will actually be upheld. And the unfortunate reality is that large farms can still technically subvert these shortages just by paying a fine for additional water, which means that it's not really working as a solution. And while the solution clearly needs the rest of California and the lower basin states to do their part and lower levels, they're obviously the most reluctant to act as that will affect their profits the most. California and Arizona grow really water intense crops that are really lucrative. Alfalfa is used to feed most of the nation's farm animals, and cotton is grown in these regions. And they are lucrative crops that a lot of farmers continue to grow. And in addition, they don't want to lose their funding and they don't want to lose their money. And so California and Arizona really don't have an incentive to be the ones to play nice, except for the fact that they're going to lose their entire water system in a few years. We're reaching a point where there's only about 150 feet left in Lake Mead. They're going to run out of water. They're going to run out of electricity in the region. So somebody needs to step up and finally take the cuts. And yeah, California is doing a good job making this first bid, and hopefully this will lead to further negotiations that leads to a lot more water being removed. But ultimately, this is what happens when, for over 100 years, you misuse water, and you have to have full turf lawns and golf courses and grow water-intensive crops in a desert, while misallocating a river and over-allocating a river, and have competing interests fighting over who gets access to it based on who colonized the region first. While I can only hold out hope that an agreement can be made, in a lot of ways it feels too late already. Aridification has already begun, and the outcomes look bleak without a major overhaul of how the land and waterways are treated. And if the federal government doesn't step in and actually bite and try to do something, I do not see these states managing to negotiate in even the smallest ways. And again, California's produced less than even a tenth of what it needs to out of its full water supply. And it still needs to reach levels of close to 2 million. And it's only hit 400,000. I don't know how they're going to manage to do this. It just seems like an impossibility as long as we continue to manage capitalism the way that we do. So, with that said, if you've enjoyed what you've watched here today, consider liking the video, subscribing, and leaving a comment, as well as joining my Discord. If you're in a financial place to do so, and only if you're in a financial place to do so, please do consider supporting me on Patreon, especially as political content like this can often be demonetized on YouTube. It goes a long way to helping the channel, and it is appreciated. The links for everything that I mentioned are in the description down below. With that said, my name is Anarchist Terra. Thank you so much for watching.